I know. I know that neighbor's cat's mean to you. I know the neighbor's cat is teasing you. But it's kind of your fault because I told you he's not your friend. Anybody who's going to say those mean things to you isn't really your friend. Okay? Alright? And I don't care if nobody wants to go to the dance with you. You're a handsome boy. He's having some issues today, as you can tell. Oh, 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 a little bit of doggy angst. Anyway, let's talk a bit about the yellow wallpaper. So, I gave you guys a very weird intro into a discussion for yellow wallpaper, trying to connect it to Chopin with the Cajun Ball and the storm. Now, Story of an Hour was actually a really good connection for this too. I think Emma ended up writing about that one accidentally, even though I'm not going to penalize her for that because that story is actually really incredibly pertinent for the conversation today. Anyhow, so yellow wallpaper. Yellow wallpaper is... It's a story that is so unbelievably horror and like good horror that it's hard for me to really give it the proper credence. That nothing has ever unnerved me as much as yellow wallpaper does, outside of maybe Edgar Allan Poe. But there's something even worse about yellow wallpaper. Mainly because the story itself is so unbelievably tragic. To set the stage a bit, and I'm sure you guys probably followed along with this in the story itself. The big connection, the big reveal, the big mystery that I kind of set up for you guys to find in the reading of the yellow wallpaper was the fact that women didn't really have any voice. They didn't have autonomy. They couldn't really speak up for their own well-being back then, right? Their roles in society were so unbelievably set that men had to speak for them. Now, this was an incredibly dangerous thing when it came to healthcare. And it was something that happened over and over and over again. So what's essentially happening in this story is our main character has given birth. It was a difficult birth. She is suffering from postpartum depression. This is a very, very common thing. Postpartum depression is, very well understood now. Women who suffer from it need therapy. They need support. But the treatment for postpartum depression and any real mental health problems back then was often 10 million times worse than the actual disease or the malady itself. She is told to avoid stimulation. She is told to stay indoors. She is told to rest, rest, rest. Now, again, she tries to voice the fact that she wants to get out, that she wants stimulation, right? She wants to do all these things to try to keep her mind occupied rather than just resting, resting, resting. Rather than just sitting in this room with this god-awful wallpaper. And just keep in mind, think about how ghastly this wallpaper would have been. The fact that it's got the complexity of those weird designs that kind of make it look like bars. I'm trying to think for a minute. The ugliest wallpaper you could possibly imagine. Like, when I was young, my grandmother's house had this floor that had a very intricate, busy design to it in the kitchen. It had this kind of weird diamond square pattern with all these very 1970s kind of browns and avocado greens going around in it. And even as a kid, I remember just thinking to myself, that is ugly, right? That's fugly. And the thing is that design, that pattern, even as unpleasant as it was, you could get lost in it because of how needlessly complex it was. Now, this is probably not something that you guys are going to really instantly connect with, but let me give it a try. Have you ever seen a design that is overly complicated and you stare at it for a long time? You kind of start to get this really strange feeling of uneasiness that something can be moving like behind it, that patterns grow and then disappear, reappear later. And sometimes you can even see things like faces in it. I know, I sound like I need to adjust my medication after saying that. At least, the only thing that I can really explain this and kind of give it some justification. Have you guys ever seen those old Magic Eye posters? I don't know what happened to those things. I don't know if they were giving people headaches or something, but in the 90s, they came out with these Magic Eye posters. And it came with this little thing underneath that had 2 dots, and you were supposed to focus on the dots and bring the dots together, practically cross your eyes. And then, if you were able to look at the poster with your eyes crossed and, like, kind of focus in on it, you could get this strange 3D picture behind it. It was a really weird thing, right? So, as crazy as I sound as I talk about the intricacies of patterns and designs, the brain has a tendency to put things into a complex pattern that aren't necessarily there. Like, we have very active imaginations, and we can end up, like, seeing connections, they disappear, they reappear later. It can be extremely unsettling if you're not aware of what's happening. If you've never experienced this, I'm not sure I can really suggest it, because it is something that can actually kind of drive you crazy if you look at it long enough. And so this woman is trapped in this room with this ghastly wallpaper, and her mind is just kind of left to rot. And she stares, and she's locked in here, and as her brain basically begins to implode on itself, of course, it's going to, like, fall into the patterns and the intricacies. Now, depression, someone who has struggled with depression's a hell of a thing, right? It can do all sorts of crazy stuff to your mind. It can have you do and have you experience, like, almost hallucinations if it's bad enough. And so the thing that's interesting, one of the things that I really like about this story is you can read it primarily from 2 different directions. One, you can read it as a gothic horror story, right? That there is some type of monster in the wallpaper, that there's a thing in the wall that she sees and is drawing her in. That's a nice Twilight Zone moment, as I like to call them. The idea of someone coming out of the wall. Like, you think about all these modern horror movies like The Ring and stuff like that, where creatures or ghosts or whatever come out of electronics. This is kind of one of those weird ideas that could have been the seed for that. So you could look at this as a kind of gothic horror piece where some type of monster has lured her in and potentially switched places with her. Now, I think that's a perfectly legitimate reading. I don't think most scholars would look at it that way, because when you think about what's actually going on in the story, the realism and the naturalism and the kind of social activism side says that there is nothing supernatural going on here. And I've had to deflate that balloon a lot. Here in literature, we often don't see true elements of supernatural stuff, right? So if there's nothing supernatural happening here, more than likely she's simply just lost her freaking mind. She has gone into something that I call a fear delusion, or even a type of schizophrenic episode, maybe even like a disassociation. She has become someone else. Now, the funny thing is, when I say disassociation, I'm going to bring in a little bit of psychoanalysis here too. I've told you guys before that you can find articles on Galileo not necessarily about literature, but you can bring in other disciplines to talk about research and to get other perspectives. For Yellow Wallpaper, for Yellow Wallpaper, one of the things that we might be able to assume is that she is undergoing a huge trauma. She might be suffering from some type of psychological disorder besides postpartum depression. Looking up an article for dissociative identity disorder would maybe potentially suggest that she's become a different person in her head. She's stopped being herself, and a new personality has taken its place. This is not necessarily unheard of. Severe trauma can cause the brain to create a new, I hesitate to use this word, a new entity for itself, a new identity that typically is created to protect the individual themselves. So this person in the wall might represent herself, might represent her feeling encaged, trapped, imprisoned, and that need to get out and that need to be someone else so that she can feel some degree of autonomy in her life. Because if you desperately want to escape this room and you desperately want to stop this medical imprisonment, well, the only ways you might be able to do that is to start crawling along the floor and start like actually giving in to the trappings of insanity. It's like, if I'm not going to get out of here through reason, and I can't explain to you that I need to have stimulation and I need to escape, well then fine, I'm going to just be the animal that you're making me into. I'm going to act crazy because what else am I going to do? So in a lot of ways, there is kind of a clinical explanation as to what's happening in the story. She switched places with the entity in the wall because she just desperately needs to escape, and it's the only way that she's ever going to get out of this situation. Now, this gets even worse when you think about what might have happened to her. A lot of mental disorders, and this is a joke that I sometimes say, it's not really a joke, it's true. A lot of mental disorders back then, and keep in mind that like mental disorders would have had absolutely ghastly treatments, and a lot of them would have potentially made you worse. One of the first things they do to you if you were having a severe mental episode, they would lobotomize you. Lobotomies were devastating, like horrifying what they did. And like just explaining what they are, they drill into your skull and they cut a piece of your brain out. Sometimes it would, I guess, quote unquote help, as much as having a piece of your brain removed can help. But a lot of the times this turns you into a practical vegetable. It would absolutely devastate you. And yet this was considered one of the ways that you would treat things like depression. This happened a lot with people with depression, bipolar disorder. And so the actual fate for this woman, if there isn't just like an actual creature crawling around outside, if it's not a bad horror movie, the fate for this woman is probably to get a piece of her brain cut out, which, right? So this is a heck of a story, and all of this is coming about because her opinion of her own well-being, her own need, is not being listened to. I mean, let her out of the room. Let her go walk in, like, near the beach. Let her paint. Let her read a book. They wouldn't even let her read a book. They're like, no, that's too stimulating. Like, seriously. It's pretty crazy. This story is extremely realistic, too. And I know it's funny because it's like a gothic horror story. But the circumstances that she's encountering here are extremely realistic. This is one of the things that they would prescribe and they would say women need to do in order to calm themselves, in order to like come down off all this negativity and all this negative emotion. It's amazing how much medical science has changed since then. Really wasn't that long ago that a lot of people still believed that if you wanted to treat a sickness, you had to cut people open and bleed them. Like, there was never any evidence that bleeding helped anyone at all. And it's one of the oldest medical tactics in, like, modern history. So, anyway, I really love this story. I'm thinking we need next to do some drama. Now, let's do Long Day's Journey into Night. Here's what we're going to do next week. Next week, rather than posting a video, I'm going to give you a link to the YouTube version of Long Day's Journey into Night. And it's a good play. Great American play. So a little bit later, after this era, I'm a little bit more into the modernist era. So I might actually do a YouTube video of me explaining what modernism is. Because that might actually be quite important. But for right now, focus on your papers. Focus on that poetry analysis. Let's see how you can go from that. And we'll talk more about all Yellow Wallpaper, about all these stories as we get into modern history. We try to connect these things together. I really would like to start laying foundation for your final research paper. If we could get some nice, heavy work on that over, our quarantine nightmare, that'd be really, really good. So that's our goal. I am having some internet issues at my house. I don't even know if this friggin' video is going to go out today. I'm going to try. But anyway, where's my dog? Say bye-bye, buddy. You get a kiss? No. He's still depressed because of all those mean things the cat said to him. Okay. Be safe out there.